All right, it's finally here, the Gerber Dual Force. So we've been talking about this tool, God knows how long, 8, 9, almost a year probably. And here's hoping that it at least meets expectations. I don't know, let's just go ahead and dig right into it. All right, so here we go. First thing I noticed right off the bat is that it says made in China. So I was actually under the impression it was Taiwan, but I guess it's not. So let's go ahead and get this thing open. Gonna trim this off. All right. So first of all, sheath could use a little bit better fit and finish, but it is a two-directional sheath and it's included, so can't really complain about that. And it is indeed a dual force. It is not something else. That's always a good start. Wow, this is bigger than I expected. Not in a bad way, per se, but it's not a small tool. We're actually going to pull out the Leatherman Surge in a little bit and do a quick comparison because it's probably the most apt one. But for now, let's take a look. I mean, it is a slip joint, so I'm expecting some amount of play, but that's not deal breaker right there. I would say it's not more or less aggressive on the metal cutting side than the Leatherman Wave or any of the Leatherman files. The cross cut seems pretty good. Straight cut seems okay. I wasn't expecting all that much out of a file. Files tend to be one of those weird finicky things that can even vary from model to model. And then this chisel is very, very sharp, like surprisingly sharp. It's not a good example, but it actually will cut through. So it's sharp. It's definitely a chisel and not a prying tool, which probably makes sense because if you're hardening this thing for a file, you don't necessarily want people to be prying with it. But as a scraper, I think that's a very, very useful tool. The back side of that, on the same side, is a saw. Now the thing I'm checking with this is thickness at the cutting edge versus thickness at the back, and actually this is more than normal. I can feel the difference in the dimension. Much thicker here than it is back here, which is the way it should be. Those are very aggressive teeth. They're bigger than I would have expected. Not necessarily a bad thing. We'll have to compare lengths of saws at some point. And then, of course, the one-handed blade. It's a little tight, but that's kind of expected. Looks exactly the same as the center drive. And like the center drive, these edges on the back are not the most comfortable thing, but it's still not too bad. And then, of course, can I one-hand the bit driver? I can. Pretty cool. And I'm not sure it's exactly the same or they've cut it a little differently so that it actually is in line. But because these are not quite flat, they had to think that one through to get it perfectly straight. All right. And then can I get this out one-handed? I can. I doubt I could get the bits out, but oh, it's magnetic. Nice. Plastic, holding it in, that's not a problem. For me, at least. Okay. And there's some kind of detent holding that in. It's not the proper term, but you get the idea. Okay. Now let's get to the big piece, right? Nice movement. Surprisingly, and I've used some slip joint pliers before, this is actually not that much play. And this is really cool. They're flush. You know, a lot of times with slip joint pliers, there is a nut on one side and then a riveted side. This actually is damn near flush, so you'll be able to get this into small spaces. I'm going to compare the thickness in a minute. So it's not really a narrow tip, it's still a blunt nose tip. Pretty thick. I mean, these are not overly sharp, but at least they're well formed. Interesting. That opens wide, man. So I can reach that far, and that's what? That's probably like, jeez, how far is that? It's about 1.25 inches without me having to go any further. That's a pretty wide opening. And I could probably get even further up at the tip. So if I'm doing that, oh, that's interesting. It's about the same. Now the other thing that we want to note is in the back here is a cutter. And it's bigger than I expected, and there's actually a hardwire cutter right there. Interesting. Hardwire cutter there, and then it's angled. These are actually angled, they're not flat. This edge. Looks like they're actually filed or sharpened as well. Yeah, they're pretty sharp. Okay, well, we'll have to test that. This is not a testing session, this is an unboxing. So we're gonna have to put this through some different tests, and I'm gonna get some help with that, I think. I'm sure Ben over at Texas Tool Crib is certainly going to be able to put this through more testing than even I can, for sure. But so far, it looks solid. It is much, much bigger than I expected. So let's get some comparison on dimensions, first of all. So I'm going to pull out the Leatherman Surge. It's hard to tell. This is the Leatherman Surge. So it's almost exactly the same length, but it is definitely a little bit thicker, mostly because of that screwdriver. So let's turn this side. It's a little bit thicker. So let's actually see. I'm not going to pull out the calipers, but we can just get a rough estimate. I would say 7/8 of an inch versus what is a little over 6/8 of an inch. So it's definitely thicker. I don't know if it'll fit in all the sheaths. And in fact, this sheath was designed for the Leatherman Surge by Yellow Birch Outfitters. I doubt it's going to fit this. He actually has one for the center drive, which may fit better. But I just wanted to see, could I do it? And the thing is, I think I could still do it. I think this would still technically work. But I'm going to guess that you are going to need a custom sheath if you ever decide to do your own. Because this isn't quite... I think it's mostly because of that bit driver. But it was kind of just interesting to see. I wanted to see, would it fit? And it technically does. I mean, it would definitely work. I could definitely use this as a sheath if I wanted to. But, yeah. Now the sheath is, you know, classically mediocre. It has elastic, but it does have an extra spot in the front for bits, which really matters. And the fact that it's included is great. I also think with a tool this big, carrying it horizontally is a real option. That might be considerable, because I mean it's kind of a very wide piece to carry, especially if you got bits in it. It's probably going to come out to like here. So this is not necessarily a pocket carry. They don't even bother with any pocket clip options, just like they do with the center drive. definitely sheath carry only. I mean, I don't know what to say. This is an unboxing. It is exactly what I expected. It doesn't appear to have any fundamental flaws with it. And if we kind of apply, as I like to call it, the Adamantium Test, and I've never talked about this before, but it's something I think about. If we assume that neither one can break, like if we're comparing two tools and neither one can break, they are essentially indestructible, okay, how does the tool sets compare? And that's one of the things like we're going to get into. So one of the biggest omissions here is the scissor. Now, when I tested the Leatherman Surge Scissor, I wasn't actually all that impressed with this particular performance. Maybe it's because it's black oxide, but it makes me think that it would be better to potentially carry a dedicated scissor, or let me see if I can find one, or a diagonal cutter. I really think that in many ways that would be more effective even if you had a surge. The difference here is you get a full-size hex bit holder, and it's inline and it's one-handable. It's easy to access. It doesn't have proprietary bits, just like the center drive. And I think that really, really matters. And the quick access to 2 additional bits, this was a really good idea. I had major problems, as I've shown in my center drive video, with the bit holder actually causing problems. These are not going to do that, and I actually love how you can access them. It should be easy to do whether you have gloves or not, and the way they're flicked out, you're not going to launch the bits either. Like, in other words, knock them out. Yeah, I mean, I'm really happy with it. Now, what I want to see, and I'm sure a lot of other people want to see, is just how hefty these really are. What surprises me, though, is look at the width. These are forged plates stuck together, and yet it is practically, and I thought it might be thicker, but it turns out it's practically identical in width to the width of the Leatherman Surge. That part is very interesting, and that's very good because I actually have a number of slip joint pliers, and they're all relatively wide. This actually will get into places even those won't, and there's enough metal back here that you can really get into a spot and potentially wrench something down. The other thing is, by being able to open it wider, there's the ability to grab things like a pipe that's inside a fitting, and then to be able to squeeze it hard enough that you can actually pull the, unscrew the pipe from the fitting. I think that plumbers could potentially get good use out of it, as they probably don't use cutters all that often, and even if they did, there's one right in the back, and it's far wider. In fact, let's take a look. I think it's probably about 1 centimeter long. It's a little bit more than 1/4 inch, almost 3/8 of an inch. And if we're including the hard wire cutter, you're talking about just about 1/2 inch of cutting. But pretty much you have a little bit over 1/4 of an inch of cutting space. So it's not going to cut like big, thick wire in one clean pass, but it's available. And I think that's a big thing, because you also have all of this open area to work with, to grab from. What I'm going to hopefully do here, and this is, I think, the best thing. Man, that's really clever. See how they did that? These plates, and then they captured the joint with the opposite plate. That's really a good idea. Anyway, what I want to do with this is I would love for a group of people who bought this tool to help me with testing it over the next year, because we're never going to be able to conclude that these are really comparable until we have at least a year of usage. And I think there are people out there, real, tradesmen, people who use their tools every day, who could really push this thing. I would love to see what that feedback is like. And I think that there will be a combination of different, how people feel about this, but we have to talk about it in the context of heavy duty tools like the Surge. especially when this is $140 and this is about $80. So you can almost buy 2 of these for 1 of these right now. And if you combine this with, say, a diagonal cutter or an electrician's shear, it may be better, potentially, we don't know yet, may be better than combining this with, say, a 7-inch or like a 175 Cobra, Knipex Cobra, right? They kind of have similar combinations, but the thing is if you do that, you still don't get the ability to have surface snips, right? Like you don't have the ability to cut at the tip like you would with a pair of diagonal cutters. So I don't know what the best pairing is. Both I think are reasonable, like really reasonable, based on what I'm looking at. The question will be, will this hold up? We already know, because we have years of data on how the Leatherman Surge handles, right? We know this is like pretty undisputed as being one of the best heavy-duty tools that exists. Over the next year, though, we really need to see if this can be, you know, in the discussion of being top-notch. But the cool part here, I think, is that they are so different. You could sometimes take both, and you would be potentially justified depending on what you're doing. I love it. I also love how comfortable this is. All those rounded edges, how wide it is with a pair of gloves, and the fact that they've done that thing where they were saying they brought the handles closer, that was a very good idea. Because especially with how long it is from pivot to handle, if I line up the pivots, there's an extra, Jesus, that's a lot. There's almost an extra inch of leverage here, an extra inch. So it's yeah, I'm happy. I'm very excited to try this out. I will definitely be using it quite a bit. There really, other than Gerber's MP600 blunt nose, there really isn't anything like this. And now that I'm seeing that it's also kind of thinner, they've kept it relatively thin, I like it even better. We just need to get some testing. I think at this point, it's just a matter of getting enough people with the tool and getting some feedback over time. But as of right now, they delivered on what I thought it would be, which is a really, really, really well thought out combination of tools. I know there's going to be some issues with the file. Obviously, it doesn't go all the way down, which is kind of annoying. But in truth, I think the fact that it has that chisel end may end up making up for it. I mean, this is not a tool that's in any of the other tools in this category, like the heavy duty tools. So either way, I like it. Actually, that's not true. I take it back. The Victorinox Spirit. Hold on, wait. I'm gonna go get it. All right, so now it's worth mentioning that the Victorinox Swiss tool and this particular one is more than double the cost. Okay, just pointing that out. But still very, very good. Another heavy-duty comparison. So we have the 3 major heavy-duty tools. The only one we don't have on the table that's worth mentioning is the Super Tool 300, and it is absolutely worth considering. But mine's on loan right now. So this does have a chisel. I forgot all about it. It's a little bit smaller for sure, and it's not one-handed accessible, but it's there. Okay, so this was a very good tool, very, very popular. Love it. But this is even bigger, heftier, and actually being on the outside like this and actually having enough length might make it easier to have a better angle getting into something, and it avoids all of the components of the tool. So there's some advantages. It's a little bit different, but there are some advantages. We're gonna have to talk about this some more, but I'll tell you right now, from what I am seeing, and if you're able to get it for the price from like Smoky Mountain Knife Works, where it's like $78, is this worth $78? Oh God, yeah. Oh God, yeah. especially when this is 140. And this with that kit, by the way, is like 175. So right now, in 2022, could I, just on what I've seen so far, feel good about this tool? Yeah, I feel pretty good recommending this. I mean, it's still a Gerber with a decent warranty as far as the manufacturer defects and everything. And the tool choices, what looks like a very good fit and finish. I don't see anything that sticks out at me as being unusual or weird or too tight. Like, it seems fine. It's like a polar opposite of my experience with the Gerber Lockdown. It's like literally the opposite experience. This is solid, and I think is going to have a tool set that many people are going to enjoy. As of right now, I would way recommend this over the center drive, for instance. I did a video on that recently, and I think that this is far more compelling, especially when it could very well be a complementary tool to something else. I mean, there's even a justification for this with a needle nose plier, like a true needle nose plier, because it has the blunt nose capability. So I don't want to continue to blabber on. This is our first look at the Gerber Dual Force, but I promise you, this will not be the last time we talk about it. I'm actually going to be talking with some other people who are going to potentially review it, and maybe we can collaborate on how we can properly test this. But from what I can tell, worth it. Definitely worth it. 100%. Thanks again, and we will talk again soon.